The Vietnam War ended nearly 50 years ago, but thousands of Vietnam veterans and their families are still fighting illnesses related to Agent Orange exposure. August 10th, just a couple of weeks away, is Agent Orange Awareness Day. The VVMF will hold its annual observance at the wall, bathing the memorial in the glow of orange candles in an event we call Bring Light. You can learn more about that event and how you can spread Agent Orange awareness in your own community at our website, vvmf.org. Meanwhile, on Father's Day weekend last month, we inducted the largest ever class of honorees into the In-Memory Honor Roll with a ceremony at the wall. One participant at this year's ceremony was a young woman named Dakota Tolbert from Herrin, Illinois, who read the name of her grandfather, a highly decorated Vietnam veteran who died in 2022 from Agent Orange-related causes.
My grandpa, my hero, Staff Sergeant Roger Tolbert Sr., Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, Bronze Star, CIB, and Purple Heart and Air Medal, U.S. Army. Go River Rats.
Dakota sat down with me for an interview at a Mobile Riverine Forces reunion in St. Louis last fall. At the end of our two-parter on River Rats, I mentioned her briefly and promised to bring you that interview. In this episode, you'll learn about Dakota's special relationship to her grandfather, his death from Agent Orange-related illness, and the legacy of service that he instilled in her. Stick around. From the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, founders of The Wall, this is Echoes of the Vietnam War. I'm your host, Michael Crone, bringing you stories of service, sacrifice, and healing from people who still feel the impact of that conflict more than 50 years later. Episode 79, Grandpa Roger's Legacy. Right after this.
Hello, I'm Gary Sinise. Nearly 3 million Americans served in Vietnam, and more than 58,000 have their names inscribed on the wall. Those that pay the ultimate price in service to America. Some might ask why the Vietnam War still matters. It matters because more than 58,000 lives were cut short and their families forever changed. It matters because we should never forget how Vietnam veterans were treated when they came home. A lesson learned so that our current generation of veterans are treated with respect. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, the organization that built the wall, works to ensure that future generations will understand the war's impact. I'm asking you to help keep the promise the wall was built on. Never forget. Visit vvmf.org to find out how you can get involved.
Dakota Tolbert attends reunions of Vietnam veterans with surprising regularity, and when she does, she stands out. Partly because she's very young. You don't see a ton of people her age at these events, and when you do, they're usually kind of in the background, providing a helping hand to a grandparent who served. And that's how it started out for Dakota, too, but since the passing of her grandfather in 2021, she has continued to attend these reunions. And she does not fade into the background. You definitely notice her. Whether she's engaging a group of veterans over a photo album or being the first to stand and salute when taps is sounded for the fallen, she leans into the experience fully, often wearing her American Legion Color Guard uniform. I recorded this interview with her in September 2023 in St. Louis, Missouri.
What brings you to a reunion of Mobile Riverine Forces?
Well, my grandfather had served in the 9th Infantry Division, and we had gone to the reunions together every 2 years, and I just continued to go.
When did you start going to reunions with your grandfather?
About 8 years ago. So this is the 4th reunion that I've been to.
And how long ago did your grandfather pass away?
2.5 years ago.
Okay. So you went to 2 or 3 of them with him. This is your first
2.
one without him?
This is the second one.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. what led you to start going to these reunions with your grandfather?
Well, somebody had to chase him around. Well, he was on a motorized scooter and was on oxygen, and so he needed someone to go with him, and his wife, Sarah, my grandmother, she had to stay at home because she had a lot of medical problems as well. So him and I went, and he was a truck driver, so he was used to just traveling all over the road. And we had went to Gettysburg, the Battle of Shiloh. We always went road tripping. So some of the veterans had reached out and had informed, hey, we've got this reunion. How about you come on down and join? And so the first reunion we went to was in Indianapolis, in Indiana.
You mentioned that you grew up with your grandfather.
Yes. He raised me since I was 3 years old. And so my grandparents raised me basically my entire life. And so we were very close. I mean, we shared the same birthday, February 13th. We shared the same cake, German chocolate cake, every year.
What's your grandfather's name?
Roger.
Roger
Tolbert.
Mm-hmm. When you were growing up with your grandfather, did he talk a lot about his military or Vietnam experience?
No, not at all. I don't think he really ever mentioned it till I was about 13, 14 years old. And he always wore a baseball hat, and he was a Silver Star recipient, and it had the Silver Star patch on his hat. But he kind of mentioned what it was, but not in detail. But I definitely didn't understand it. And how he introduced the war was he had photo albums, and he sat those pictures in front of me, and he said, "This is what this is." And he said, "Hey, there's some gory pictures in there, but this is what it is." And I still didn't really understand it at the time. And so he had joined the Patriot Guard motorcycle group, and there were a lot of veterans in that group, and they started to kind of connect, and he would slowly open up and talk about that, but for the most part, he was pretty quiet about it.
And how old were you when he showed you that photo album?
About 13, 14 years old.
And that's how he introduced you to his history with the military. I'm guessing he didn't stay in the military after Vietnam.
Well, he was a truck driver, and he was about on the road, and he retired in 2003. So and truck driving back then was you're home maybe once every 2 weeks to a month. So I really didn't see him. My grandmother had to do most of the raising. So, but he really didn't talk much at all.
Mm-hmm. What branch was he in?
Army.
And so once he introduced you to his history as a soldier, what more did you learn about him and his service, and how did you learn it? Was it all from him, or did you learn from other people as well?
Well, I didn't really understand it till we had went to our first Vietnam reunion, and I got to speak and hear the stories firsthand of those veterans that served alongside with him of what he actually went through.
As Dakota learned about her grandfather's experience in Vietnam, she also began to connect the dots between his service and his many health-related issues. Roger Tolbert was suffering from illnesses connected to Agent Orange exposure.
He was a river rat, and so he's walking and treading through the water, and he had also served with the 101st Airborne. So when they were spraying the fields, I mean, he was just walking through it. And I mean, it had concluded to heart congestive failure. And so it had went all the way above his knees. I mean, so far we were talking about amputation of both legs. And we just opted out of that because he was on blood thinner and he had a pacemaker, and it was too big of a risk.
Sure.
Agent Orange-related illnesses can affect the generations that follow the exposure. As a child, Dakota suffered from asthma, but she seemed to grow out of it. Inspired by her grandfather's service and his undying patriotism, Dakota enlisted in the Marine Corps right out of high school in 2012. She was gung-ho and in great shape physically, but training at Parris Island soon revealed that something hidden was afflicting her. She became severely ill, and her medical issues eventually led to her discharge. She continued to suffer from a range of symptoms, from ulcers to intestinal issues to double vision, all of which, she says, are the kinds of things being found in the grandchildren of Vietnam veterans who were exposed to Agent Orange. Fortunately, Dakota's health has rebounded, and she is building a career in law enforcement in her hometown. Roger Tolbert grew up in Detroit. He told Dakota that he enlisted in the Army in 1967 at the age of 17 after watching a John Wayne movie. He arrived in Vietnam just in time to experience the Tet Offensive.
By 67, even a 17-year-old must have heard of Vietnam.
I mean, he was gung-ho all the way. So he served about a total of 9 years of service, and his re-enlistment was coming up, and Sarah, my grandmother, his wife, said, hey, I've got 3 kids to raise at home. You know, I really want you to stay home. And if it wasn't for that, he would have went back.
My understanding is that one of the reasons you come to these reunions is because you're kind of trying to piece together the parts of your grandfather's story that you don't know. What are you learning? What are you discovering as you go?
Well, he's such a decorated veteran that as I go through all of his belongings that he's left, I mean, he's kept thousands of pictures. I have his passport. I have maps, flags, his uniform. I have so much that he's managed to keep. And as I opened his albums out, I found a specific article about the USS Benoit. And I said, well, I've never heard about him really talk about anything other than the tango boats. Well, as I open these albums up, and I find an article, and it says the ship name USS Benoit. I said, I don't remember him talking about that. And as far as I know, he was just on the tango boats. But he never really talked about that. So I bring all these photo albums every year to the reunions to ask the guys, hey, do you hear about this? Do you remember this? And reached out, and I get to learn more about how these ships operated. And, you know, T stands for Tango, and it was a transportation boat. So I learned more about those operations and those missions. And this certain article that I have, it talks about where they found the enemy, and they found rifles and grenades and ammunition. So I get to kind of have a better understanding when I go through these articles, and I find out more information that way by reaching out and bringing all this information to the reunion.
So you travel to these reunions, you show the veterans, the River Rats, your photo album, and ask them questions, and your goal is what? Like, what's driving you to get such a detailed understanding of your grandfather's time in Vietnam?
You know, I think that's the biggest question that I don't even know myself, because a lot of this is just falling in my hands because I went with him, and I still continue to go.
As you started to attend these reunions with your grandfather before he passed, did that lead to him opening up more and more and sharing more with you?
Oh, it definitely did. I think it even did more than the Patriot Guard when we were with the motorcycle group. Because some of the men that were at this reunion were actually with him when he got that Silver Star. And there were 4 other veterans that also received the star, and they had lost one. And they talk about that. Matter of fact, the combat vet that was involved in that is here today. And they have pictures, and I have pictures of that award ceremony too, and it's just, they're standing there at this ceremony, and they've got this big smile, and it's just kind of interesting to see where they have that one moment where they can just drop their shoulders for a second and just kind of like breathe for the second after what they had just been through. And I just find it such a privilege to hear firsthand stories from those veterans instead of just like reading about it in a book. And I don't think there's more of a bigger privilege than that. I work in law enforcement, and there's some days where I don't want to leave the house. So just with that, I can kind of sort of understand what my grandfather went to, because he didn't want to talk about it. I mean, he was very dressed, was very assertive for so many years. And then as he's slowly starting to open up, I mean, he would just have the biggest like belly laugh, and we would just randomly go buy cars one day and bring it home, and he'd teach me how to work on cars, and I mean we were very, very close, and it's just so interesting to see from such a very hard-headed man and very structured as well, and it had just turned around to something just completely amazing and different. And I mean, we would go to a restaurant, and we would see another veteran, and they wear the baseball hats, and you can always tell if they're a veteran or even first responder. And we'd get our plate, and he'd turn around and he would go sit next to him, and his plate would go completely cold. At the time, I really didn't understand. I said, "Grandpa, your food's gonna go get cold," and next thing you know, we're sitting there for 2 hours just talking. And now to this day that he's gone, if I see a veteran sitting alone at a booth, I'll go sit next to him. I said, "Hey, I'm so-and-so." And they're probably like, "Who's this 29-year-old female coming up to me?" When I say, "Hey, my grandfather was a veteran, Silver Star recipient, 2 Bronze Star, 1 with Valor, Purple Heart, very decorative veteran. And, this is what I do. I'm on the Honor Guard at my American Legion, Marine Corps League, and serve in law enforcement. And I'd just like to hear your story, and here's mine." And so next thing you know, they're smiling, and he had severe PTSD. I couldn't walk in the house without him being startled. You had to kind of like tap on something or say, "Hey, I'm here," or turn around. My grandparents had to have 2 separate bedrooms. He would even think the ceiling fan was a helicopter. He flew in the Loach helicopters at one point because he had served in the 101st Airborne at one point. And he had a really difficult time for so many years. And I think that's probably why he couldn't talk about it.
After his military service, Roger Tolbert worked 26 years as a long-haul truck driver until, eventually, his deteriorating health took him off the road.
He was considered 200% disabled. And, you can really only get 100% at VA benefits. And, he had a lot of complications from Agent Orange, heart congestive failure, diabetes, neuropathy. He had only 10% working in his lungs, so he was on oxygen. Let's see, I'm probably forgetting something. He was on blood thinner, had a pacemaker. I mean, some days it would just surprise me how he was still going. But he just never let it faze him. He would just stand there and be like, "Hey, take a seat, Roger." "No, I've got it. And it was just so inspiring to me just to see all the medical problems that he would have, and he would never let it affect him. I mean, we would go on these road trips, and I'm the one chasing him around. So it's like, who keeps who in line? And any new car we bought, he was getting in it to try it out anyway. It didn't matter. So basically, it was amazing to see. He would go to the VA and say, "Hey, forget about what that counselor's saying. This is who you need to apply to help get you a ramp in the house. I mean, we got a new ramp, all the handrails, a walk-in shower." But
you helped other veterans.
Yes, and that would have been if the veterans that reached out to him through the American Legion, because they would see the Silver Star license plate on the back of the truck. And as a matter of fact, our chief of police in our small town had pulled him over one day. He says, "Oh no, I'm going to get a ticket." And chief walks out. He says, "Well, I saw your Silver Star license plate. Well, I'm a veteran myself. And I just want to say, hey, we look out for our veterans in this town." And so that was how that kind of all blossomed out to how they would reach out and say, "Hey, do you have all the benefits that you need?" So when he passed, the coroner had said, "Hey, I'm going to put Agent Orange on his death certificate so his wife can get the benefits that she needs, instead of just putting heart congestive failure." Because we know it's really hard to get your benefits or just what spousal needs after death.
It's a nightmare.
I mean, they take out quite a lot for the spouses. I mean, they were married for 50 years, and the first question they asked her, have you been remarried yet? And it was almost like an insult, but I mean, that means it probably happened before.
Oh, sure.
But yeah, they were married for 50 years. Matter of fact, they knew each other he was home on leave. They knew each other for 2 weeks. They met at a square dancing bar. And I guess some of the guys are fighting over the girls. And they're walking on to the parking lot. And my grandpa's out there, and the guy comes up to my grandpa and stabs him. And that's how my grandparents met. And my grandmother had to drive the 1971, it was a 1971 Roadrunner to the VA hospital. So she drove the getaway pretty much and had him in the back of it. Well, he said he woke up in the VA hospital, and the officer's there. He says, oh, no, I'm going to get arrested. He said, no, I'm here because the guy that stabbed you is in the room next door. And I'm in here in case he comes over to finish the job. I said, can you imagine that after you get home from Vietnam and you've got this going on?
This was after his first tour?
This is when he was home. No, I'm sorry. No, he was home on leave. He had done 3 tours in total.
That's right. You said that.
Yeah.
3 tours.
Yeah.
Which tour was it that he served in the Mobile Riverine Force?
Let's see. His first tour and his second tour was 9th Infantry Division Mobile Riverine Rats, and his last tour was with the 101st Airborne.
Okay. And on which tour did he earn the Silver Star?
His first tour.
His first tour?
He was a specialist at the time.
He's just a kid. He's just a kid.
Yes. Yeah.
What have you learned about the circumstances that led to his Silver Star?
Well, they were under fire only 100 meters out, and they had learned that one of the guys was wounded, and Roger had he says, I'm going to go get him. And the combat medic veteran that's here today, they were talking about this today. He says, are you sure? I mean, we're very heavily under fire. And Roger says, I'm going to go get him. And he unfortunately had passed. And so that's how he earned the Silver Star.
He wandered into enemy fire to retrieve what had turned out to be the body of a...
Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, 1 with Valor. And it's just, he was like that till the day he died. Matter of fact, the day that he died, and he calls me and he says, hey, I've had a bad fall and I'm bleeding. Can you come to the house?
We'll hear the rest of my conversation with Dakota Tolbert after a short break. Stick around.
Hi, I'm Anne Margaret. I went to Vietnam to entertain the troops in 1966 and 1968. My guys, my gentlemen, if you lived through the Vietnam War era, you know the impact that the war had. But today, we are in danger of history being lost. Current generations know very little about the war or the people who served. As more of our Vietnam vets pass away each day, their stories are being lost to history. Together, we can change that. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund is the organization that built the wall. It works to ensure that future generations will understand the war's impact. Let's help keep the promise that the wall was built on. Never forget. Visit vvmf.org to find out how you can get involved.
The Registry is an online community created by VVMF that connects veterans of the Vietnam War era with each other. By signing up for the Registry, you can upload and share stories and images, connect with others who served during the Vietnam era, and connect your service with people you knew whose names are now on the wall. Join the community and preserve your legacy or a family member's by signing up today at vvmf.org/registry. And now, back to my conversation with Dakota Tolbert.
He called me because he had a fall about a year previously, and I was down in Texas at the time. And they didn't tell me about it. And I was kind of pretty upset because I'm very protective over my family. And so I think that he called me and said the ambulance because he knew this was it. So he didn't call 911. He called me. And so I rushed to the house, and when I found him in the floor, and he had a headlock, it was probably about 4 inches deep. I think he cut his head on the filing cabinet when he fell down to the ground. And his statement was, "Now calm down." I said, You're telling me to calm down, and you're literally dying right here? And I'll never forget that. And
how'd you know he was dying?
There was just something that, it's weird. I mean, he's had so many medical emergencies. When you're on blood
how did you know this was it?
Well, I don't know. I think God was saying, hey, this is it. And plus, I don't know, it just scared me half to death because of his medical history. But there was something
when you're on Dilantin or any kind of blood thinner, I mean, it
looks more scary than it is.
It just bleeds like crazy.
But the thing was, even though he had a cut to his forehead, he still wasn't bleeding as bad as he has been before. He's had nosebleeds that were so traumatic, looked like there was a murder in the bathroom. But there was just something that was saying, hey, something's not right. And, his wife, Sarah, the time this has happened, 2 days prior, she had went into surgery for a knee replacement surgery, and we had major complications, and she ended up in ICU. And so she was on death status at the time. And this was during 2020, and he got to see her and everything, but we had to take turns seeing her because it would take him an hour to get into the truck because he was so disabled that it would take him quite a while. He says, hey, I want you to go up there and sit with her, and then when I get up to the hospital, which is just 2 blocks down the road, but he had such a lot of trouble getting into the truck and just standing up, and he was just kind of taking it. It was just decreasing. I just seen it that he couldn't stand upright without falling, and he was starting to slur his speech, and he had a lot of severe underlying medical conditions, and it was just progressing. So anyway, he was able to see her. We had done this for 2 days, and the ICU nurses were letting us both come in there because she was under death status and under the circumstances. Well, when I was in the ICU room, that's when he called me and said, hey, I fell. So I rushed to the nurse's office. I said, something happens to her. You call me. He's fallen. I got to get to the house to go get him. And luckily the back door was unlocked. I walked in the house, and that's when I found him in the floor. So, since I worked at the sheriff's office, I'm just calling the ambulance. I said, hey, get to the house. I needed help to pick him up. He was 6'3", over 300 pounds. I can't lift him up myself. And so I'm there, and I get to him, and I got him in the floor, and I see that the skin from his wrist all the way to his elbow had peeled up because it was so delicate from Agent Orange and skin cancer. And then there was something that just said, hey, you need to just lie to him and say that Sarah's going to be okay. And at the time, we all thought, we were getting the living will out. We thought, this is it. And then something was just in my head that Grandpa's going too. It was just the strangest experience I've ever had in my life. So his feet were stuck underneath the dresser. And when the EMTs got there, they were trying to help pick him up. But since his feet were stuck, and he has no feeling in his feet, so he can't sit up. And I went to pick up the dresser, and I remember it being so heavy, I couldn't pick it up. And I said, you got to do it anyway. And I guess adrenaline was just rushing through my body. I managed to pick up that dresser. Well, it was a dresser, like a heavy nightstand. Okay. And I picked it up and somehow threw it on top of the bed. And I guess the adrenaline was just one thing after another. And then the next thing I know, I'm doing CPR on my grandfather. And the EMT guys, they thought this was just routine falling. Nobody saw that this was about to happen. Right. That he was about to die. But that's what happened. And he had made it through every other medical emergency, but there was just, the man upstairs was saying, hey, this is it. So as he's being put in the ambulance, I see his feet dangling from the tarp as they're pulling him out. And I think I mean, some part of me thinks that he was still alive, but I'm pretty sure he had died right then as I was holding his head saying, hey, I'll meet you at the hospital. So maybe I was just kind of delusional, telling myself that he's still there, it's fine, I'll meet him at the hospital. And Sarah is in ICU, unaware that her husband has just passed.
And you're thinking that she's going to go any minute.
Yes, I was prepared for 2 funerals. So I go to the hospital to confirm the body, and I see a white sheet laid over him, and I felt he was so disrespected in his death. And I thought, this is a veteran and a Silver Star veteran nonetheless. I said, somebody get me a flag right now. I said, oh, we'll get a flag for the funeral. I said, no, I need a flag now. So my neighbor's son, he had served in the Army, and he came to the hospital and brought over a Garrison American flag, and we unfolded it and laid it on top of his body, and we did a hand salute right then and there in the hospital. And I don't know what came over me, but I needed a flag right then and there. I needed respects to be taken care of and just give him the respect that he earned, and I just didn't want him to go out like that. So I was just under so much stress and adrenaline. They put me in a wheelchair after all this, and they take me upstairs to the ICU because this is the same hospital that she's in. So they wheel me through, and I go through the doors of the ICU room just open up, and something just like overcame to me, and it was the strangest feeling. It was like my grandfather's spirit was like putting his hand on my shoulder saying, it's okay, it's gonna be okay. It was weird.
You just suddenly became very calm?
Yeah, it was like him and God was there. It was like my faith had just tremendously just grew right then and there. It was very strange, but I'll never forget that feeling. So she was on ICU for the next 14 days. I said, oh no, I got a funeral to plan. And one of the Legion members showed up to the ICU, and I still don't know how he got into this day. And his name is Lieutenant Dan, actually. His name was Dan, actually, and he was a lieutenant in the Army. And man, I don't know what I would have done without him. He helped escort the funeral, all the funeral details. We had 4 posts, 2 American Legion posts, 2 VFW posts, and to this day, it's still the largest funeral detail that they've done in our small town. I mean, cars were pulled over for miles as we had escorted the funeral procession all the way out to, we have a family-owned cemetery. And
you do?
Yes.
Your family's been there a long time.
Yes, our extended family. It's in 1 acre out in the middle of a cornfield. So we have a little tiny 1 acre cemetery that we bury our family out there.
And that's where Roger is.
Yes, and he's got a beautiful headstone with a American flag engraved. I mean, we were so patriotic. Our house was just decorative and old Americana. But if it wasn't for Lieutenant Dan, I don't know what I would have done. I mean, he just took care of everything and made sure I had something to eat every day. He brought me food from the American Legion and brought it to the hospital and just kept everything in line for me. And Sarah had miraculously overcame everything. And we finally got her blood pressure under control, and that's why we could get her off of the ventilator. And so she didn't know, but she had finally, was up and well. I had to ask her questions to find where the paperwork is at, because everyone's like, well, does he have there was some kind of I forgot what it was called, a money box or something that the bank would have. So I don't know. I mean, we never talked about these things. We just say, hey, you're responsible of everything. But we never talk, hey, this is what I want in my funeral, other than burying him in his uniform.
Right.
And I sure didn't know what kind of responsibility that was, for sure. Yeah. And so I had to tell her, hey, Grandpa's passed. And there were 2 days that I didn't know how to tell her. So
she must have figured, he hadn't been to see her.
Well, she was just under fentanyl, so drugged out. She don't even remember anything.
Really?
And she became very combative. She had to be under restraints, actually. And I don't blame her. I mean, you find out that your husband has died and you're in ICU.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't even imagine can't imagine. And it was very hard. It killed me to just watch her in pain and upset. And she didn't want to be there. She tried to leave and she fell down, and we had to get her a CT scan just in case. I said, I don't want, any internal bleeding or anything going on. And so, let's see, I think in total, it must have been 18 days. Yeah, so she had survived after 14 days. I said, well, I've got to get you out of here. I can't bury him without you going to his funeral. And I can't cremate him. That just goes against his wishes, and I can't do that. So they gave her a day pass, but they wanted her to come back. And well, I basically had to do a rescue mission to get her out of the hospital. And I brought her some clothes and got her hair done, but she was still under just, when you're under those kind of drugs, you're just still under, it takes a couple days for you really to get back to normal. And she really didn't understand what was going on, but she was definitely upset. And it was probably it was the hardest thing I've ever had to go through myself and watch. But I had to step up, because who else was going to do it and take care of? I've got the house. I've got to take care of her. So anyway, we buried him, and it was a beautiful, beautiful funeral service. Even the Patriot Guard was out there too. The Army did their honor guard, and about 3 months later, Lieutenant Dan calls, and he says, hey, why don't you join the American Legion Honor Guard? I said, well, I don't think I can tell Lieutenant Dan no, and I didn't know really what I was going into. I really didn't see any other services until my grandfather's service, when they were there. And so that's how I met all these guys, was at my grandfather's funeral service. And so I joined the Honor Guard, and I don't know what it was, but joining the Honor Guard was a way for me to grieve by doing these military honor details. It kept me close to him, and I got to just hear more of his stories and friends that knew him. The 9th Infantry Division had called me, and they always checked on to see how I was doing. And that year alone, I did 57 honor details. And then, it's been about 2.5 years, and sometimes we'll have 4 details in one day or that weekend. And it just, I don't know, it was a way of something that I could do to grieve, but at the same time I was giving back, because I remember how I felt. And the Honor Guard being there for me, I felt that if I gave back to the families, that however it could help, just support, just being there was enough for me. And I felt that's the way I can give back. And so since then, Sarah is like it never happened, and it's amazing. And she's joined the Quilts of Valor, and she sews, and so she makes quilts to present to veterans. And they made me honorary member of the 9th Infantry Division, and have asked me to come back to the reunions, and wow. I still do that. I share his photos, and the first reunion I'll never forget, we all went out to this cafe to have dinner together. And those guys were just throwing spitballs back and forth together, acting like kids. And it was just, they still are like that. And it's so inspiring to me that these guys can crack a joke and just be an absolute hell or high water. And it's just, no offense, but my generation of men, you can never compare. I mean, you have big boots to fill.
They don't make men like that anymore.
They sure don't.
So let me ask you one last question. From the time when you were 13 and he sat you down and showed you this photo album until today, when you're at this reunion in St. Louis, with all of the different avenues that you've had for learning about your grandfather, what is the most surprising thing that you've learned about him?
I think just the greatest thing is hearing, I really don't even hear that with the other American Legion members, where you hear 2 men or even more, the same company, that they served alongside each other. And they said, yeah, I remember your grandpa going to get that guy and trying to rescue him and bring him back. And said, we don't know. We're so far under fire that I don't know. And
he's a big target.
Yeah, over 6'3". He was very tall. And he carried the prick, the radio pack. And so with that antenna, radio pack, and he's 6'3", I mean, he was the target. So
he was wearing the radio
Yeah,
pack when
yeah.
he went? Oh my God.
Yeah, he sure was. So, but I mean, he was like that till the day he went out, strong as could be. I mean, he didn't care. I mean, he was maybe a little bit stubborn. He would do what he wanted to do. So, but he was probably the most honorable man I could ever look up to.
I think that's a perfect way to end.
For more stories about the effects of Agent Orange exposure, check out episodes 10 and 16 of this podcast, as we continue to talk about the various ways that the Vietnam War echoes across generations. Agent Orange, unfortunately, will keep coming up. Learn more about VVMF's efforts to raise Agent Orange awareness at our website, vvmf.org. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more stories of service, sacrifice, and healing. See you then.